and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mr. Clark.
Mary Italiata, Assistant Superintendent of Elementary Education.
Anne Marie Marone Caliendo, Assistant Superintendent for Finance and Facilities.
David Caston, Board Trustee.
Diana Akapora, Board Trustee.
James Tucci, Board Trustee.
Jack Feldman, Counsel for the Board of Education.
Kelly Fallon, Superintendent of Schools.
Eric Garingswell, Board President.
Betty Sabato, Board Vice President.
Paul Peller, Board Trustee. Frank Romaldi, Board Trustee.
John O'Farrell, Assistant Superintendent for Secondary Education.
Patrick Harrigan, Deputy Superintendent.
Great, and I'd like to just read a quick statement. Under the Open Meetings Law, the audio or videotaping of a public school board meeting is legal as long as it remains unobtrusive and does not disrupt or interfere with the deliberative process or the right of persons in attendance to observe or listen to the proceedings. Although the district is not recording, the public should be advised that this meeting is subject to being taped, and thus any comments, questions, or statements made during the public portions of this meeting may appear in print or online, including YouTube or other websites. So just wanted to take care of that initially. And before we get into the agenda, there's I'm going to take one item out of order, and that is recently I think we've all experienced quite a winter, and the winter yielded lots and lots of snow, and unfortunately the snow didn't disappear before the spring sports season started. So as a result of that, there was a need for our high school teams to have access to the fields, yet with 2+ feet of snow on the fields, it was not tenable for the kids to shovel the fields because we didn't want them damaging the turf, and it wasn't really ideal for us to wait for Mother Nature to warm up. So in working with the district, some of the local youth clubs really found that there was a potential solution of a project donation to the school district, and the school district was very open to that. And what we were able to do through the combination of Dix Hill Soccer and the Hills Lacrosse groups, where we were able to purchase a plow that allowed the current machinery that we have in the district to use it. It would not harm the turf, it would not affect the warranties on the turf. And what it did was it allowed access to the fields much, much earlier than would have been possible in any other way. The nice thing about the donation is that now that plow is an asset for the school district for all the years going forward. So if during football season we get another one of those October snows like we had a couple of years ago, we're in a position to not harm our football or soccer seasons. And the same thing with the lacrosse or spring soccer seasons or field hockey seasons in the fall. So to me, this is just a great instance of everybody trying to figure out how can we have our kids have the best situation possible. And it really was great that the district was so accommodating in terms of receiving the gift, and that the clubs were doing that. And I'd like to point out Martin Target is here. He's the president of Dix Hill Soccer. So. And the total amount of the gift was in the ballpark of about $7,000 is what it cost. So again, it was just a nice situation. And later this evening, I think we'll have a motion to accept the donation. Great.
Thank you, Mr. Garingswald. And the district is extremely grateful to both youth groups for the donation of the plow to assist in our athletic program. It was very well received by all of the players as well as our coaches. So again, our collaborative efforts in working together is greatly appreciated, and we look forward to that relationship continuing in the year. So thank you very much for the donation.
Okay. Next item is student recognition. So
We are extremely proud this evening to recognize several students who have received perfect scores on their ACTs and/or their SAT exams. So at this time, I'd like to turn the meeting over to Mr. O'Farrell, our Assistant Superintendent for Secondary Education.
Thank you, Mrs. Fallon. Each year, there are nearly 27,000 students named valedictorians from public high schools across the country. Approximately 8,000 students are identified as National Merit Scholars. And together in 2014, Harvard and Yale accepted nearly 4,000 students combined. The students here tonight belong to a club that is more selective than all of those. This year, we have 6 students, both juniors and seniors, that have earned perfect scores on either the ACT or their SAT exams. As a district, this is the first year we are recognizing this accomplishment, and we don't yet have a name for the club. But tonight, in Half Hollow Hills, I'm going to call it the Better Than Bill Gates Club. Mr. Gates, although currently the richest person in the world, only managed to get a 1590 on his SATs, so you can feel good about that. This past year, over 3.4 million SAT and ACT exams were administered. Of that, fewer than 2,000 students received perfect scores. That is much less than 1/10 of 1%, and speaking mathematically, awesome. So please know that we are extremely proud of all of you, and that we hope you continue to work towards your own version of perfection. From High School East and achieving perfect scores on the ACTs, we have Daniel Testa and Bailey Caston. Forward somewhere. Congratulations.
Congratulations.
And from High School West, achieving a perfect score on his SATs, we have Brandon Epstein. And of special note, we have a student from High School West that actually achieved perfect scores on both his SATs and his ACTs, which they really don't keep statistics for. So, Josh Wendy. We have 2 other students that couldn't be here this evening. From High School East, we have Grant Berlin that achieved a perfect ACT score, and from High School West, we have Rose Bender. So please give them a round of applause.
Thank you, Mr. O'Farrell. We are also thrilled this evening to recognize the recipients of the Hills Foundation mini grants this evening. And Dr. Patrick Harrigan and Mrs. Denise Ham from the Hills Foundation are extremely pleased to speak with us about the grants that are going to be recognized and honored, as well as recognizing our talented educators who compete for these.
Thank you, Mrs. Fallon. I assure all of the teachers there are no SAT requirements or revealing happening here this evening. This year we had a tremendous number of grants. It was actually very competitive, and we had some spirited debate over which grants we would accept, and in the end those grants were chosen because of the impact that the Hills Foundation felt they would have on students here in Half Hollow Hills. So the Hills Foundation has already made some contributions to these grants. We'll be accepting almost $10,000 this evening for a total in the neighborhood of about $12,000 that the Hills Foundation is providing back to the community through our teachers to our students. So a huge thanks to all of you who came out and supported the volleyball fundraiser, or for those of you who may have supported our fall or spring fundraisers at Adventureland. This is where those funds go, and really the Hills Foundation puts it to great use, through creative teachers like we'll talk about tonight. So our first project title is Teen Health Coaching Program. It's a holistic nutrition club supporting healthy lifestyle choices in students to increase their well-being. It's from Jen All, health teachers. If you're here, come on up. And we have video conferencing with France, and this teacher, Jennifer Houston, is going to use iPad technology to connect Half Hollow Hill students to students in France. And the benefit that she is hoping to do is smaller groups, more kids, more access to technology, being able to use the iPads instead of larger devices, saving room in the computer lab for her colleagues. So congratulations, Jennifer. We encourage through the application process is collaboration, and we have 3 elementary school resource room teachers who titled their grant Mini iPads for Giant Learning. They're going to collaborate together and utilize technology to enhance resource room instruction in our elementary schools, and that's Lisa Conquet, Rose DeBella, and Heather Stein. Our next recipient coined something that was new to me, the idea of computer-assisted language learning using technology for our English language learners. Michelle Flanier is going to use iPads with English language learners to enhance listening, literacy, and speaking proficiency. Our next grant, again, is a collaborative effort between 2 West Hollow teachers. Team 6-2 Click Through, using remote clickers combined with the smartboard technology in their classroom to increase student engagement and also at the same time allow teachers to quickly assess student understanding. Tina and Ed. Our next example, and this is 2 years running for this particular teacher who submitted a mini grant and successfully been awarded a grant. And this one is going to take what kids are learning in class and what kids are learning in an architecture club and put it to use in the real world. Raised garden beds for IPC class and modular playhouse for Madonna Heights. Mary Ann Mead. Earlier this month, we had a meet presentation, and one of the items that was discussed, Mr. Murphy was talking about new inroads and possibilities in high school physical education, and one of our grant recipients, Mr. Mike Gibbons, his grant is exposing students to crucial outdoor skills, advancing new directions in high school physical education, so creating a new strand of learning with outdoor physical education for our high school students beginning next year. Mike Gibbons. Our next grant, I think it's fair to say for all of those of us who work with the Hills Foundation, that if we were allowed to have favorites, this was it this year. Try again next year, maybe you could be favorite. But World Drumming in Classroom Music, introducing an authentic and meaningful way for students to interact with music and better understand culture from around the world through drumming. Nathan Swift. He didn't come, so he's no longer the favorite. We've talked a lot about robotics in recent meetings and through the years, and we have different levels that students participate, one of which is the first Tech Challenge competition team. It has 50 students participating in this club actively. They compete in competitions, fundraise, enhancing their STEM skills, but also they need to be entrepreneurial and work together, and they were so entrepreneurial that they knew to lobby the Hills Foundation. Their coach, and I think some of their participants are here, so who's ever here on behalf of the first Tech Challenge competition team, come on up. our last one, we will not be handing out any of the supplies this evening because the project involves plants and living organisms. Bugs Be Gone, restoring the greenhouse at West Hollow Middle School, Stephanie Derringer. That is all
So
for this
I
Please.
just want to say on behalf of the Hills Foundation to thank all of you for all your hard work and innovative ideas. Our children are grown now, 29 and 33 years old, but the Hills Foundation is always giving back and saying thank you because you continue to make our children flourish. So I wanted to thank all of you for what you continue to do and thank the board and the administration, all of you as well.
Thank you for all of your comments.
Brandon, don't sit down yet. Good to see you. So Brandon Epstein, again, from High School West, he achieved a perfect score in his SAT this past year. So,
Very good. Ready? One more, okay? Go ahead.
Great. Congratulations.
I would like to turn the meeting over to Ms. Anne Marie Barone-Caliendo, our Assistant Superintendent for Finance and Facilities, for 2015-16 budget presentations.
Thank you, Mrs. Fallon. So we are chatting again about the 2015-16 budget, and today this is what we're going to be discussing. We'll talk about enrollments and then what that means for staffing, employee benefits, which is a large piece of our budget. We are an employee organization. You know, produce widgets, we produce well-educated students. So salaries and benefits are the biggest pieces of our budget, as is for another district. So we'll speak about benefits. The property tax levy cap, I'll interpret for you the chart that was in Newsday the other day. Then we'll talk about state aid and then a transfer to capital update from the last meeting. So first, student enrollments. So the story about student enrollments is something that we are all very familiar with. We closed 2 buildings last year as a result of declining enrollments. But what I wanted to show you on this chart was what's shown in the green and the purpley blue. The green represents for the individual years what the demographer projected. A demographer is a specialist in projecting out what live births will be and projecting out what enrollments will be at a school district, for example, over the course of a number of years. And they usually project out for 5 years. 2 years ago, we had a demographer project our enrollment when we commenced the work to reduce our building number of buildings that we educate students in. So what the purpose of this chart is just to show you that what was projected is incredibly close to what actually happened. So we have a lot of faith in the demographer report, and right now we're looking at, for 2015-16, we're looking at, we have 373 students currently enrolled for kindergarten, and we believe that that number will go up to about 446 based on the demographer's projections. And then you'll see there for 16-17 and 17-18 what the demographer is projecting. But we're not at the numbers that we have been in the past. The piece that is interesting is when you overlay that with 12th grade. So same kind of chart here, demographer projection versus the actual or estimated enrollments, and just a caveat here that for 15-16 what I've noted is what's in the blue as estimated is actually the current year 11th grade student enrollment. I've just moved them forward with no other intelligence behind it, just to plot forward a number. But we would expect that to be relatively close And again, the demographer's report is really coming in very close to what we are seeing as our 12th grade enrollment as well. So on both ends of the spectrum, it's been very accurate. The very interesting piece is when you overlay the two. So the blue or purple, that's the seniors that we're graduating out, and the green are the kindergartners that we're bringing in. That's the story of enrollment. So enrollment is declining. Our graduating class in a number of years will be essentially half of what it is today. The total enrollment, you probably remember that chart from the corner wall, which will have its home back on the wall somewhere, but this is what we see. This is going all the way back to 1954 up through current year. We know that it's a roller coaster look. We know that that trending is going to continue, but we're not going back down to the lowest levels we've seen, but we know there's going to be an uptick on the other side. We just have to really play it smart and do what's responsible in our budget to be able to address that declining enrollment. And the impact is on staffing. So on the staffing side for elementary, we're looking at currently we have 140 total sections, K through 5, with an actual enrollment of 421, which you saw on the other slide. When you look at what we're projecting for next year, we're looking at reducing that by about 3 sections. Again, we have kindergarten enrollment still in progress, so there's still a lot of work to do. And as Mrs. Fallon and Mr. Tagliata always say, somehow when the yellow buses start rolling down the streets, people realize, I have to register my child. So we know up through September we have registrations going on. So we know that the numbers will creep up from there, up to probably about that 450. But we're looking at 3 less sections next year for elementary staffing. And then when you look at the secondary staffing, we're looking at a net reduction of 1 6th grade class on the gen ed side. Again, the same lower enrollments on the elementary side are graduating up into the middle schools and then ultimately the high schools. So we know that that progression will be taking its turn at that level as well. On the special education side, we had a set of pretty intensive staffing meetings, and we're looking at approximately 6 full-time equivalent special education teachers for meeting the special education IEP mandates, as well as after we look at the scheduling of all those classes. So that's what we're looking at from a staffing perspective for the 15-16 school year. When you look at employee benefits, there are many pieces to that, so I will take you through each of those pieces. Healthcare is one of our biggest pieces, and unlike most other school districts, our employees contribute essentially commensurate with their salary. The higher the salary, the more that you're contributing, and that's generally the formula that we use. We are also looking at, in terms of kind of just setting out the facts, Affordable Care Act. Dr. Harrigan spoke, I believe it was last meeting, in detail about the Affordable Care Act. We won't discuss it again here, but suffice it to say that the impact of that is something that we're still working through to understand how that's going to impact our budget. We do know that the 4 real key parameters are it's an individual health care plan that must be offered to a certain set of employees, offering minimal essential coverage, and it must be affordable. And then you're looking at a certain base of employees, those that meet this criteria for full-time status. So that's something also that we are still working on and will be working on until the board adopts the budget in April to understand what the true financial impact of this will be. The other complexity about the health care plan is that we, like many school districts, offer multiple plans to employees. We have the night shift plan or the Empire plan, which is probably what you've all heard about. Most districts have that. We've got most of our participants on that plan. And then we have a second plan that was much more popular in the past. It's the HIT plan. And that plan used to be the lower cost plan. Essentially, when you go to the visit doctors, your out-of-pocket cost was minimal. And now we're seeing the tides turn, and I'll show you that in 1 second. So, just to go back, okay. So in terms of budgeting for healthcare, there's a big unknown in the room. So if you have the 2 calendars side by side, for 2015, as an example, this is what we're doing now. We know that the healthcare premiums are set for the calendar year. That's what we know. That's how Empire and that's how HIP project their premiums. Whether it's a premium or a premium equivalent, that's how they project it for the calendar year. The problem is that we work on a fiscal year which crosses 2 calendar years. So what happens for us, school districts across the state, is that we know the premiums for the first half of the year that we're budgeting for, but we don't know the premiums for the second half. And so what we're projecting is for 2016, what those premiums will be. And we do a lot of trending, and we work with the insurance companies to identify what they think it will be, and then we make our best guess based on what we've seen. But it's a big question in terms of budgeting for healthcare, which makes an impact on ultimately what that number is that you put in the budget line. So it's unpredictable for a number of reasons. Knowing what is the premium versus what's going to be the premium for the second half of that year you're budgeting for. You have your unknown regarding individual or family plan mix. We offer employees individual or family plans based on their contract, and when employees switch from one plan to the other, that impacts us financially. So making sure that we're budgeting appropriately for those trends. New versus exiting participants. Again, being able to manage, it's not that you have 1,000 participants day one, you have 1,000 participants at the end of the year. There is a lot of migration. If someone's coming on for an individual plan and we've got 4 people leaving under a family plan, that's going to benefit us. So knowing what that mix is and how that's going to impact the budget is something we're also looking at, and that's another big variable. And then you have your Empire NISHIP versus your HIP plan and the migration of employees or retirees between the two, and that impacts us as well. So those are all the unpredictable pieces that we try to get ahead of when we budget for healthcare. So when you look at the premium increases, which is what this slide is trying to show, those are the increases for either a family or an individual plan. The increases are different under the NISHIP plan. And that's the history of what they've been since 2009. So you're looking at a peak of about 14%, and then you've seen a low of about 2% or under that. And the big impact we saw in 2014, which I was a little skeptical of when we sat in meetings with the Empire NISHIP folks, was that they were going self-funded. They had acknowledged that they had some years that were spiked, and they needed to try and address and mitigate those costs. We don't have an impact on what we can offer. They give us the rate, the premium equivalent, and that's the rate that we pay. What we have control over is what our employees contribute, which I mentioned we've already gotten ahead of that, the curve on that. So year one of the self-funded plan was great because those rates were about 2% or under. That was a great achievement. The fear was that that wouldn't last. So under a self-funded plan, there is a bit of risk on that, and we're seeing the impact of that in year two. And we know that those rates are mitigated from where they would have been, and we know that the right folks are managing the plan. It is a very significant, well-run operation that is being run. It's actually run by this New York State Civil Service Department that runs the plan, but we're still seeing rates that are less than what we had seen in the past. But we know that they are looking at trying to continue to keep those rates stable. On the HIP side, what we saw on the right-hand side there for 2015 calendar year caused essentially an exodus of employees from the HIP plan. So they lost about 30% of their participants from the district who exited out of HIP. Employees or retirees saying, this is now way too costly for me because they saw a 14% increase. And that those folks then migrated to the lower cost NISHIP Empire plan, which ultimately benefited us. So that was actually a good migration on our part. When you look at those healthcare expenses in terms of raw dollars, the 14-15 estimate that's noted there is what we're projecting will end this year, and then the 15-16 is what we're going to be budgeting for at this point for next year. And the increases will never parallel exactly to the HIP increase or the Empire increase because of those variables that I had on that one slide that had those 4 variables, because people coming in and out, who's on family plan, who's on individual, who's migrating from HIP to Empire, those pieces mixing will cause us to see what we see here, which will not always mirror what we see in terms of the actual rate increases. So on pension, which is another part of our budget under the benefit side, there are 2 pension systems that we work with. One is TRS, which is the Teachers Retirement System, which is a mandated program for full-time teachers and administrators, contribution rates of which are set by the state, set by the plan. We don't set them. And what's interesting and important is that that rate is set across the state. We are not paying a higher rate because we're wealthier than another district. It's across the state, it's one rate, and that's what it is. And we pay that rate. We actually don't even pay it, they take it right off of our state aid. They keep it easy for us. Not that we appreciate that, but the rates that we've seen vary significantly. This is a history of the TRS contribution rates. And it's tough to manage when it's that cyclical. Back in 78, 79, we were at 21.4% contribution rate, mandated, they take it right off the top. We had a low in 2002-03, and we're looking at right now 13.5% as the rate for next year. Another way to look at it, which is the way that impacts us most, is when you look at those rates, but as a year-over-year increase, because what happens is the state or Newsday will report out that school districts are having a windfall because TRS rates went down, or the ERS rates went down, which we'll go through in a second. And when they report, for instance, and we'll do the flip side, when we had some increases, and the rate went in 2012-13 from 11.8 to 13-14, 16.2. And the state would say, well, that's 4 percentage points. Not a big deal. But the problem for us is shown here, or I'm trying to show here, that the variability of what the actual percent increase is significant. So a 4 percentage point increase for us is a 30% increase for the budget in terms of that budget line, because it's just a different way of looking at the numbers. The percentage point is truly what is 16 minus 11.8. But when you look at the actual impact in terms of how we have to budget for the increase, it looks much more like this, which is a very different dynamic than what the actual rate ends up being. And so what we see is that in 79-80, as an example, that was a 5% increase over the prior year. You had a 70% decrease in 2002-03 from the prior year, 123% increase from 03-04. 04-05, it was actually a 600% increase. I couldn't put it there because it would have skewed the chart, but that dot is supposed to be 600%. How do you manage a budget when you've got a 600% increase on your rate? And again, rates that we don't set, they're set by the actuaries. So it's going in the right direction now, and all we ask for is stability. Please at least stabilize it so that those charts aren't looking so erratic. And anything above the line is greater than a 0% year-over-year increase. Anything below is the negative, just in case you can't see the scale on the left. Same kind of thing, so your TRS expenses, just like we had the healthcare expenses. It's an indicator of the salaries. When we've had years that we had excess, that may help to offset some of the higher rates on the TRS. If projecting the decrease, you can see there the negative 16% is what we're projecting for next year. Again, thanks to the rates being reduced. ERS is that other pension system that's covered under the New York State and local retirement system. The membership in ERS is essentially for any non-teaching staff. Those members must be offered the program. They must be offered entrance into the plan. Most employees take it, and the controller is the administrative head of the system. The contribution rates for ERS are very different in that it's a different system, it's a different actuary setting the rates, but it's set by tier. So employees in different tiers in the system have different rates applied to them, so it's a bit more complicated. The other complication is that their fiscal year is not aligned with our fiscal year, so we have to also project out essentially a year and a half from now what we think the rates will be. This is the history of the ERS contribution rates. Again, almost 20% in 78, a low of 0.3 in 91, and we're looking at 18.2. It's going down, but again, it's still a high amount. And then that is the similar chart to the TRS, where this is what the actual increases are year over year. So anything above that line is anywhere from a 1% increase year over year to the height we had seen, which was an almost 300% increase. So that's what's not in the media. That's the piece that we struggle with in terms of trying to meet this mandate, pay these bills, and then really trying to level it off in the budget so we're not seeing the spikes in the budget. The history of the ERS expenses, again, similar kind of a slide. For 15-16, we're looking at about a 9% increase from where we think we're going to land this year. Other employee benefit codes, Social Security. This is for FICA and Medicare. It is a 6.2% FICA contribution we're required to make, as are our employees, as well as a 1.45% Medicare contribution we're required to make into the Social Security system. And this is where we believe those numbers will land, just under $10 million for next year. Workers' compensation is another interesting area. We worked in the middle there, you'll see we started on a decline. In 2010, 11, 12, the Workers' Compensation Board had made some changes which significantly and negatively impact employers. Employers were now required to pay out more for workers' compensation claims. We have seen that, and you can see that 50% increase. Those are actual numbers. What we ended up doing in 2012-13 was to migrate to a new administrator. We self-fund this plan, and we have an administrator who assists us in reviewing the claims, in fighting the frivolous cases. So we started that aggressively in 2012-13, and we've seen positive results from that. Claims that are clearly workers' compensation invalid, we are absolutely paying those as any employer should, but we're really seeing some positive impact from working with our new administrator on the plan, and that's what you see there. The 31% increase is not because I have a crystal ball saying that we're going to have more workers' compensation claims. What that really is about is it's an unknown. This is one area that I don't know what's going to happen. As much as we mitigate all of our risks, and we are very proactive working with facilities and working with our nurses in our buildings, the reality is I don't know what's going to happen. So I have to make sure I have funding in this code to at least cover a base level. And I've been budgeting at that 1.1 million, and I'm going to continue to do that unless I see enough of a trend that it's going down, and then I'll reduce it out. But that's where our workers' compensation expenses have been. Life insurance, the total amount you're looking at there is about $500,000. We negotiated with one of our vendors. That's where you see the decrease. We dropped our cost per $1,000 of coverage, and that's where you've seen that decrease in that middle section there, direct result of that work. Unemployment. The spike you see is when we had challenges with the property tax levy cap formula, and we ended up having to have some layoffs in the 12-13 year. We pay, as districts pay, dollar for dollar on the unemployment claims, and it's really a factor of who comes to the table, who is filing for unemployment insurance. I don't know, I know who's eligible, I don't know who's actually going to show up at the unemployment office door. So I have to make sure that I'm budgeting at a level that would cover those who could. The spike you see there is what we had planned for. The drop, I didn't plan for, but I'm happy it's there because that means that folks have jobs, and that really is important. So we are planning at a higher level. It looks like an enormous increase, but I need to plan for who I believe has the opportunity to go to unemployment and get coverage. So that's what we've seen on unemployment expenses. We also work with a firm who assists us in defending the district against, again, frivolous unemployment cases, and we win a lot of those. So we work with Dr. Harrigan's office a lot, and it's worked out beautifully. Dental expenses seems to be on average about a 5% increase when it's blended in, and we're expecting that as well going forward. Optical, a much smaller portion, but I'm budgeting for the 15-16 year at about $30,000, which again is going to cover me for the employees who have that as a coverage plan in their contract. The property tax levy cap, my intent is to simplify, not to complicate, but let me just take you through that chart from Newsday. So the chart is very simple. It's a side-by-side comparison of the property tax levy cap percents based on the formula which we spoke about a month or two ago. And so this is a chart that I created, and I apologize, it's a little bit small. Actually, I have to get behind it because I can't even see it. So this is a chart I created to just put together sample districts with similarities only in terms of their reported property tax levy cap percent. So I simply took Half Hollow, I looked on the list and said, okay, who else has a property tax levy cap that by formula gets them to about 2.4%, and Merrick popped up, perfect. And I did the same for other districts. I just really didn't do any other intelligence behind it, but what districts had similar property tax levy caps? And that's how they got on that list, okay? Then I took that and I said, well, what factors are on that chart and how do we make sense of it? So you have the property tax levy cap, which is a percent increase of your levy. So essentially what you're taking is you're taking that 2.42% and you're multiplying it by the levy that's currently in existence, and then you add it and then you get that dollar amount. And that's the math, that's the calculation behind it. Ultimately very simple. What's interesting though is when you looked at that chart, and this is just a sampling, there are very few districts who have the same number that pops up as their property tax levy cap, because we're all using the same formula, but when we put in our own data elements, many of us result in very different numbers. That's simply the nature of the formula, and we've talked about that ad nauseum in the past. Okay, but when you look at those pieces, all you're doing is taking current year tax levy, multiplying it by that percent, and then you're arriving at what the new levy would be. So if you look at those increases, what's interesting is the same 2.4%, but why are we raising 4.6 million and Merrick is only raising 900,000? It's the same 2.4%. What's important are a number of factors. The biggest factor is, well, how big's the district? We are exponentially larger than Merrick. But I can tell you, based on what the state believes, we are of generally equal wealth. And the way I know that is because our levy, what we raise in taxes, is the same portion of our budget. So about 80% of our budget is funded by tax levy, what we collect from residents, and 20% is funded from other places. The biggest place is state aid, but there are other places as well. A district, for instance, like William Floyd, who has 40% of their budget funded from the local residents, means that about 60%, it's not 60%, but about 60% is funded from state aid. That's an indicator of lower wealth. And so it's that piece which is very important to look at when you try and compare districts, because the first thing we all do, I am guilty of this as well, I look at the chart and I start highlighting districts and trying to say, well, where do we stand? Where's my home district? Where's my work district? And when you look at those pieces, there are two examples which I hopefully will help clarify the important pieces of that chart. Similar property tax levy cap, completely different increases in terms of their levy. And it's because our budget is by design bigger because we educate exponentially more children, and also because our property tax levy as a percent of total budget is the same. So for this first example, the biggest deciding factor is because we simply have exponentially more children than Merrick. The other example, which is on the exact flip side, are those two districts, Three Village and William Floyd, who have the same property tax levy cap. That's what their formula arrived them at. Again, Floyd is generating half the revenue from their levy as Three Villages, but they have the same property tax levy cap percent. And that's because of two pieces. The first is because, actually the biggest piece is because of that last item, which is that the levy represents a much smaller part of the Floyd budget. So therefore, when they apply the same 3% increase on a smaller number, you arrive at a smaller total increase. Whereas Three Village applies the same general number, 2.9, on a higher levy, which arrives in at the higher number. So understanding what a district's total budget is, how many students are they educating essentially, and how much of their revenue is generated from the levy helps to make these comparisons a little bit more understandable. But there are lots of factors behind understanding the levy cap, and one of the pieces that was most concerning to me when the levy cap conversation started was exactly what's shown here, that a district like Floyd versus a district like Cap Hollow or a district like Longwood, you can have similar percents, but how you are going to be able to raise enough money to fund your budget will be very different in a lower wealth district versus a higher wealth district. And that's one of the challenges of the formula that we've been trying to help the governor and the state understand, so that there is at least some leveling. And we'll talk about the flip side of that, about state aid, which has a reverse effect on us than it does to a lower wealth district. But the takeaway is that you need to understand a district's total budget. A larger district will naturally, by design, always be able to raise more in their levy because they're starting from a larger base, and then the percent of their levy as a percent of their total budget will be the second factor that impacts how much they're able to raise. The state aid conversation is also very important for this. We don't know what the state aid is yet. We're really hoping for an April 1st release of the state budget, the state approved budget, but for now what we know is that the Assembly had a lot of great ideas. The downside is what the impact to us would be if in fact their ideas are accepted, and I don't think they'll be accepted on face value, but it's important to understand at least what they're starting with. So the good idea is that foundation aid formula should run. They initially designed these very complicated formulas and said, let's have these run, and then here's what you would get in terms of aid, and we would be very comfortable because we'd have millions of dollars of more aid and support from the state if the aid formulas ran. The problem is that the assembly proposal focuses on low wealth districts, which is important, but it's equally important to focus on every district, the equity, and that's the piece that we struggle with here, that while low wealth districts need and deserve the support, you can't do that at by being short-sighted to the other districts who are high-performing. The other piece, which is a great idea in the assembly proposal, is the full restoration to the GEA. That's the gap elimination adjustment. We talked a lot about that in a prior meeting. That's a takeaway that the state has. They tell us you deserve 30 million, but we don't have the money, so we're giving you 25 million. Fully restore it. Great idea. The problem is that they're also looking at high-needs students and low-wealth districts as the groups that will get that money. And then the final piece is to fund the English as a new language, which we also spoke about at length at the last board meeting. And the challenge for us is that they're also looking at providing that funding to low-wealth school districts that have high needs. So good starting points. The devil's in the details, and we need to really wait very patiently for those details to see what it means to us. The final part of the conversation tonight. This morning, the Board of Education Facilities Subcommittee had a meeting, and we discussed the two capital projects that we've already discussed at length through one of these budget meetings. But I'm happy to report, at least from my perspective in terms of planning, that we're able to secure the third project from the committee this morning. We're looking at the high school east chiller and cooling tower as our third and final project to fund the $1.4 million capital budget that's in our budget that we fund through the general operating budget. Again, we discussed that whole process in detail at the last meeting. So the high school east chiller and cooling tower, essentially the existing system consists of two chillers. One has been abandoned because it no longer works. So we're working on one chiller that is barely effective and completely inefficient in terms of the way in which it runs. So we've been trying to maintain that existing chiller unit to keep it going because the second chiller no longer works. We chilled that auditorium, which is really the hub of the district for outside community groups, for fine arts events, for graduations, for moving up ceremonies. That auditorium is used all year long. But from April to October, we have to maintain the temperature in that facility. It's a big vacuous space. And we'd be able to now, with the new system, ensure that that could happen. We would replace the one antiquated, non-functioning chiller. We would refurbish the other chiller, and then we would replace the cooling tower. Essentially, it's the whole unit that makes it work, that Mrs. Fallon can sleep at night before graduations so that we don't have to worry about the place being a heat box, which is one of our pinnacle events when we have our two graduations at the auditorium at High School East. So that filled the gap of that third project and the dollar amount that we needed to be able to put that forward in the budget at the $1.4 million. So we'll go ahead and we're going to add that to the budget documents for board review for you. And I think that's it.
Roseanne, do we have any comments from visitors on the presentation? Okay, we're on to the business portion of the meeting. First is the minutes from March 2nd. Do we have a motion to adopt the minutes?
Motion.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Any comments or questions? All those in favor? Next one is the meetings, minutes from, is it March
Well, it's
2nd?
from March 2nd,
Okay.
actually, the regular meeting and the budget workshop.
We'll do the budget workshop meeting minutes. Do we have a motion? Or do we have a second? Any comments or questions? All those in favor? Great. Then we have the March 9th board meeting minutes. Do we have a motion?
Motion.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Any comments or questions? Any correspondence? Any board committee updates? Any pending or unfinished business? Okay, action items for administration.
Dr. Harrigan?
Thank you, Mrs. Fallon. My first item this evening is a resolution. Be it resolved that the Board of Education of the Half Hollow Hills Central School District hereby approves the terms and conditions of a stipulation of settlement between the Board of Education and the employee named in confidential attachment A. Be it further resolved that the President of the Board of Education is authorized to execute the stipulation on behalf of the Board.
Do we have a motion?
Motion.
Second.
Any comments or questions? All those in favor?
Next item I have a personnel report this evening that contains a certificated, non-certificated, and as well as an additional compensation report. I just want to highlight, we had spoke at an earlier meeting this year about expanding the AP courses, AP computer programming, getting more kids into that by going from 3 computer programming classes to 5. So one of the items for approval and additional compensation is a PEP course for teachers, so that we have more teachers at the high skill level to instruct those courses, because the enrollment's going to be an all-time high next year.
Do we have a motion to take the report in its entirety?
Motion.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Any comments or questions? All those in favor? Great. Motion to adopt in its entirety.
Motion.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Any comments or questions? All those in favor? Great.
Caliendo.
Thank you, Mrs. Fallon. The first item are a list of budget transfers as detailed in my Appendix A for 2014-15 school year.
Do we have a motion?
Motion. Second.
Any comments or questions? All those in favor?
Thank you. The next are the health service contracts, which are required by state education law for other districts to provide health services to the children that live in, who live in our school community, but are attending other private schools.
Do we have a motion?
Motion.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Any comments or questions? All those in favor?
Thank you. The next is for disposal of equipment. We have some simplex date stamp machines at West Hollow, which are no longer functioning, and we're looking to remove them from our inventory.
Great. Do we have a motion?
Motion.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Any comments or questions?
It's everything that comes into our offices is date and time stamped, and so that machine that's supposed to date and time stamp doesn't work because of the volume that comes in. It's just it automatically does both, so it saves time from having to do this with the traditional stamp. Updates automatically, they're not working, so we wanted to get rid of it.
Any other questions, comments? Okay, all those in favor?
Thank you. My next item is a check for a little over $1,000. It's detailed on the agenda, but essentially it's from Quaystar 3, which is a BOCES upstate. They are paying back to school districts. They're being asked by the state controller to release a fund that they had created to fund post-employment benefits. They were being proactive in trying to fund those benefits, and then the controller came in and said it's not really the appropriate way to do so, so they are liquidating that fund. School districts are required to accept the agreement, which has been developed by the attorneys at Quaystar, before the fund will be released. For us, it's about $1,000. So the request is to allow us to sign that agreement to be able to get the $1,000.
Do we have a motion?
Motion.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Any comments or questions?
Can I just ask, I don't know how important this is, but did we buy into this Quastar 3 program many years ago?
No, it's essentially a BOCES shared service. It's a shared service that happens to be offered through the Capital Region BOCES. So.
And no longer
No,
available?
we do,
of course.
we do still work with them. We work with them on some state aid planning. We do some services through them. We're required to have a GASB 45 actuarial study, which we get through them because we've been able to achieve a report that we need at a very good cost. So because our work with them is so limited for those two items, our reimbursement is a proportion of the overall spending from school districts. Our piece is so small, which is why we're only getting $1,000 back. Other districts are getting much more. Other districts in their own region would be getting more. But they had an actuary come in to identify how to liquidate this fund they had created. They were trying to be very proactive with other post-employment benefits to be able to fund those essentially for their staff. They have staff just like we have staff, and they were trying to fund that benefit that they owe to employees at retirement. And the controller said, we get it, we appreciate you being proactive, but you really can't do it the way you've done it. And so they have to liquidate it, and the pool of money they had, they decided to have someone come in to determine, well, how do you know how much of the money I paid for my service was attributable to the money that was in that fund? And they had an actuary come in to identify that of the money that was collected, or $10,000 that we pay them every year for the services we get, they prorated that out and said, okay, of the fund, you have Hollow get $1,034.
There's nothing legal, just
No, no.
inappropriate.
Absolutely.
Is that what they're
It's,
saying?
yes, nothing illegal. Their determination was they had gotten approval from the state to do what they did, and then another state entity came in and said, you get that? And it happens, we just don't like it, so liquidate it. So, but they had gotten approval from the state education department to do what they did.
Great. Motion to adopt. We have the motion. All those in favor? Okay.
Great, thank you. We are very happy to be working with the prior high school West graduating classes. They have collectively fundraised $12,500 and are donating that to the district, which we will then put in a couple of $1,000s from the operating budget to be able to replace the high school West curtains in the auditorium. So we're looking to accept the money this year. They waited until there was enough critical mass, and then we will be purchasing the curtains with that money.
That's great.
Do you know how far back this goes, or is this?
I asked the building, and they believe it went back about 3 years.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yep.
The great part behind this is that the students were very vested in getting these curtains for the auditorium. And every time I had lunch with them, they would say, Mrs. Fallon, where are we with the curtains? Where are we? And finally, you know, Anne Marie, myself, and Tony, we met with Dr. Catapano and said, all right, what's the dollar amount that we have here from the students? Can we make this happen for them?
That's
So
awesome.
it's great.
That's great. Okay. Do we have a motion?
Motion.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Any comments or questions? All those in favor? Great.
Thank you. The next item is a donation from the Wells Fargo Employee Matching Program. So there is a resident who works for Wells Fargo who donated money to the high school East soccer team, and his gift was matched by his employer. So the $1,000 is the employer match, which we are looking to accept that money and put that money into the interscholastic program for the benefit of high school East soccer. So that is the detail behind that.
That's great. Do we have a motion?
Motion?
Second.
Any comments or questions? All those in favor?
Thank you. The next is a donation from Target, the Take Charge of Education program. A portion of the charges that are made on the Target Red Card are designated to a particular building, and those parents who shop at Target and their students go to Otsego have generated a check for about $190 for the benefit of Otsego. So we're looking to accept that check as well, which will then be put into the supply code for Otsego for the benefit of the students.
Excellent. Do we have a motion?
Motion.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Any comments or questions? All those in favor?
Thank you. The next is a nicer check, our insurance company. We have 2 checks totaling approximately $10,000, which are repayments for repairs that need to be made to buses. One was both related to the snow. Actually, one was a damage to a bus because of the snow, and the other is ice damage at the transportation facility to the gutters. So both are for the benefit of transportation. We're looking to have a budget amendment so that we can make those repairs.
Do we have a motion?
Motion.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Any comments or questions? All those in favor?
Thank you. The next is a check from our tenant, Alternatives for Children. Just for the record, they have been excellent tenants of ours. We've been wonderful landlords, but they've been excellent tenants. We have.
You say so yourself.
Don't let me strain my own arm, right? That's not what I meant. So, but in the contract that the board authorized, we had a provision that if in fact we needed any retrofit in the building, that we would do the retrofit and we would charge them for the cost of the material supplies plus an upcharge to administer that part of the program. So I have a check today for about $21,000. We had installed a fence and we had to retrofit some bathroom faucets for their children, and we are getting paid back for every penny that we spend plus a 10% upcharge. And that's what that check represents.
Nice.
Do we have a motion?
Motion. Second.
Any comments or questions?
We are good landlords.
Good
We are good landlords.
Please comment.
All those in favor?
The next is a check from the Association of Suffolk County Supervisors for Educational Technologies. The organization is called Asset. It's a check for $550 as a result of a presentation that was made by Allison Uttendorfer, who is a high school East teacher, at the Asset January Shark Tank event. And the presentation was so well received, the money is going to be taken in by the district, if you approve it, to purchase a camera.
Great. Do we have a motion?
Motion.
Do we have a second?
Second?
Any comments or questions? All those in favor?
Thank you, and my final item is simply a correction from a prior board motion. We had the American Dairy Association National Football League Fuel Up to Play grant that was awarded to Signal Hill. I have requested that funds for the purchase of the refrigerator that they needed as per the grant go into a supply code. It needs to go into an equipment code based on the amount of money that the refrigerator will cost. We're not changing the amount of money, we're just putting it in the right code. So my request is to allow us to put that in an equipment code so we can purchase a refrigerator.
Great. Do we have a motion?
Motion.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Any comments or questions? All those in favor?
Thank you.
And your addendum?
Oh, thank you, Mrs. Fallon. I actually have 2 addendums. The blue sheet is the first addendum. It's a donation from the Hills Foundation. We'll have the addendum added to the official minutes so everyone can read it, but essentially the presentation tonight was to award the grantees with the grants that they've been awarded. This is a procedural item. The district purchased the items that were in the grants, and the Hills Foundation is reimbursing us for that purchase. So the net impact to the district is 0, but because we wanted to be able to tag the items and follow proper protocol, we purchased the items, and I have here a check for $9,966.78, which represents everything to the penny that we purchased on behalf of that grant, those grants. So the request is to allow us to take the money in, increase the appropriation to offset the expense we need.
Great. Do we have a motion?
Motion.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Any comments or questions?
If I could just, Anne Marie's office did a tremendous job, because historically what would happen is the teachers would have to go out, make purchases themselves, lay out the funds, and then come back to the Hills Foundation. That created a hardship in some cases. And also, through her purchasing agents, we were able to leverage and get better prices in many cases, and actually get more for the kids for overall less funds. So we really had a big undertaking at this busy time of the year, but it worked out great for the Hills Foundation.
And our purchasing agent was more than happy to help out in that endeavor.
That's right.
Yeah.
And great for the Hills Foundation to continue their support of our kids. It's just great stuff.
I have one additional item, the presentation you made earlier about the snow pusher. if I can just read this very quick board motion, be it resolved that the Board of Education moves to accept a generous donation of a turf snow pusher and a reimbursement check in the amount of $3,442.21 from Hills Youth Lacrosse and Dix Hill Soccer. Be it further resolved that the Board of Education authorizes these funds be added to the current 2014-15 budget by increasing the appropriation A1621.160, which is the Facilities Personnel Services Code, which will enable us to replenish that code so the impact of the district financially is zero. So thank you for the donation.
Do we have a motion?
Motion?
Do we have a second?
Second.
All those in favor? Any comments or questions? All those in favor?
Did we accept?
Did we accept the
Oh,
Hills
I'm
Foundation
sorry.
one?
I don't think we did.
Okay,
Sorry about that.
so, then I will make, I'll go back. Can we please,
We did.
oh, we have,
Yeah.
we have a show of hands?
Yes, yes, yes.
Absolutely.
Even better.
Major comment or question?
Okay. Good.
Thank you. Mrs. Vitaliano?
Thank you, Mrs. Fallon, for the board's approval this evening. I have recommendations from the Committee of Preschool Special Education.
Do we have a motion?
Motion?
Do we have a second?
Second.
Any comments or questions? All those in favor?
Mr. O'Farrell?
Thank you, Mrs. Fallon. This evening I have two items for the board's consideration. The first is a list of recommendations made by the Committee for Special Education.
Do we have a motion?
Motion.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Any comments or questions? All those in favor?
And the second item is the adoption of the Algebra 1 textbook. If you remember earlier in the month, we spoke about the need for a new algebra textbook that more closely aligns to the new Algebra 1 curriculum.
Great. Do we have a motion?
Motion?
Do we have a second?
Second.
Any comments or questions? All those in favor?
Mrs. Marini?
Yes, this evening for the board's consideration, I have the resolution to publish the legal notice, as well as approval of the actual legal notice for the budget vote on May 19th.
So do we have do you need to read the motion to us? Okay.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It's a very long resolution.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's 2 pages.
the motion to waive the rule.
You don't need to.
No.
Don't need to do that? Okay, great. So then do we have a motion to accept the resolution? Good, do we have a second?
Second.
Any comments or questions? All those in favor?
Thank you.
And then now we need a motion to publish? Or
It
is
was
that
all
all one?
together.
It was
It was all
Okay,
together.
no problem. Great. Requests from the Board of Education? Board Council? Any new business? And we're just waiting for comments from visitors.
Just one name, Mr. Dyson.
Just basically some questions regarding the entertainment budget. Last year we took, I think it was 800 to 900,000 for the generators for high school east.
Yes.
Was that approved or was that?
That was, the FEMA project was approved by FEMA. We have the specifications in with the State Education Department, and we're waiting for their approval.
Okay, so
It's all in process.
that probably we'll see within the next year or so? then?
Yes, absolutely,
So then that money then did go for the generators?
absolutely. It didn't go yet because we didn't spend it yet, but it will.
Now, we put in the budget more than we were gonna get, compensation or from, that money then is compensated, will that go back into the capital fund?
It will end up becoming the net, so we'll get back about 400,000 of the 800,000. So the 400,000 will simply show as revenue when we get it back from FEMA.
Right,
It won't go back and recycle into a different capital project, no. It will simply help to fund half of the high school east generator project.
oh, I see, but did we actually put 800 into our reserve? And then
We
we're getting
put
back.
$800,000 into our transfer to capital budget line
Right,
this past year in the budget, and we received approval from FEMA,
Right.
for their reimbursement, so we're commencing with the project. Right now, it's in with the state. So ultimately, when we start to spend the money, we will then work with FEMA to get reimbursement for their piece, which is up to $400,000.
But what I'm not understanding, we put 800 in,
Yes,
so
on the expense
we're gonna
side,
get reimbursed, and where will that 400 go
on,
once we're reimbursed?
that will simply become revenue that we're anticipating receiving. So in the budget, we anticipate getting that 400.
Right.
We get it, and then everything's okay. If we don't get it, which we will, but if we don't
Right.
get it, that's when we have to fill that gap somewhere else. So where will it go? It is on the revenue side of the budget as a line item that we anticipate getting. And
But
so long as we
physically,
get
did
it,
we actually put 800,000 into the budget
yes.
last year? So if we get back 400, then we have 400 extra revenue.
It's revenue.
Right.
That's
Right.
budgeted, that line is
Yeah.
budgeted as well. So it's 800,000 on this line, 400,000 on this line. So if we're gonna spend the 800,000,
Right.
right?
Right.
That's predicated on the fact that we get the 400,000. So getting that 400,000 is already part of the budget. When we get the check, it just goes to fill that spot in the budget, and it fills that $400,000 hole
Okay,
that
so
that was
that's
already
out.
there in the
It
budget.
nets
After we get the reimbursement, there's no money available.
It's not extra money, leftover
Right,
money,
okay.
or anything. It's already been accounted for and
Okay.
allocated.
So it's just paying for the project. And
That's exactly
that's, you know, we got our generators and the generators were just supposed to go for the high school, is that?
The project that was proposed to FEMA was high school lease generators. And that's what they,
The other one, I didn't quite understand with the, just like you said, Newsday, we're getting, taking money, but with the pension contributions mandated by the state, if we can control it. I know in the past they've done that when the stock market was going great. They said, don't worry about it, and then when the stock market tanked, they had not enough funds, so, and then they wanted more money. But basically what they do, from what you're saying, is that they reduce the amount that they would have given our district by the amount that they want contributed to that fund. Is that what you're saying?
so there are two pieces. The piece that I talked about reducing, and this may or may not be what you're thinking, but we don't actually cut a check to
Right.
TRS. They take it right out of our state aid. So if we're getting $25 million in state aid,
Right,
they just take it off.
take
They say,
right.
we need $4 million, we're taking it. That's how they get paid. That's how they guarantee their payment. The other piece is when the actuaries for the pension system go through their work, which I'm not going to make believe I understand,
Right.
but they look at 5 years of history and they project forward and say, well, what are the rates, what do the contribution rates need to be able to fully fund the pension system? And then they determine, for TRS, they determine a rate statewide. And they say, everyone's paying the same
Right.
rate. And that's the rate that we pay, that they get paid very procedurally from state aid.
Right, they cut it from the
They
money.
take it right off the top,
But
and they pay their bill.
the end result though is that with the lower amount of contribution that they take out up front, it'll be more money coming to the district than it would have been, say, last year or the year before. They cut it, the amount of contribution is less, so
The rate, the
they're
contribution
gonna be
rate,
taking out whatever the contribution is.
yeah, it just means that we are able to project a lower expense than we would have if the rate was 25%.
Right.
If the rate is 15%, we are then now planning for
Right.
a smaller budget line than we would have.
Right.
So that's the take back or the
Right, so you
savings.
save money.
Yep, that's where you save the money,
It's
and
not
that's
like
what
you're
we're saying.
saying, well, we're not gonna send them another check, they're taking it out.
They get their money,
They're just
we
getting
pay
a
our
little
bills
more
anyway, but
state aid because they're asking to take out less of a bill.
they essentially will be taking out.
Like if Leiper said, we're gonna reduce your rates, but that probably never happened. The other thing I just wanna ask, they're contemplating doing, my daughter was in the program in the BOCE Long School for the Performing Arts, and very, for kids that are talented, I have to highly recommend, the course was terrific. It aided her tremendously in her auditions, and she's going to Ithaca College, she's junior year, she's in opera there. But they're thinking that not just because of our school, but less people going in different districts, not sending students. They're considering, doing away with the whole project, how many students do we have right now, approximately, that go to the Lisa, performing arts?
I can find out, I don't know
Yeah,
off
I'd
the
have
top
to
of
find
my
out. I know it's at least 4 or 5. Typically, we send, you know, as you know, in their senior year,
Right.
they can ask to attend. I know we have at least 4 or 5 on them because I typically sign off on them, but I don't know the exact number.
Right.
Yeah, and Mr. Dykeman, it sounds like you have a lot of very specific questions.
Well, that's the,
Oh, that's the last one?
yeah.
Okay.
That was just a specific, because it's coming up, we don't have any say in the matter. The BOCES is going to vote in it soon on whether you keep the program. The only thing I would say with that is, I would ask the board, if they do cut that program, then maybe in the future for the kids that it does benefit, have some program within the school to maybe give them, use that money and give them some sort of special training or assistance in the auditions or whatever they would need for those programs.
Yeah, Mr. Dykeman, just so there's actually a new principal there who I know fairly well.
Right.
I sent a letter of support.
Right.
I have sent kids there in the past, and he's a friend of mine, and he actually runs the Doshi school, their STEM school over there as well.
Right.
So we're hopeful.
Yeah,
Sign the petition online.
that's it. Thanks.
Do we have a motion to adjourn? Do we have a second?
Second.